Hi everyone. Tonight we're going to take a slow walk into a medieval castle after dark, where the torches flutter like nervous birds, and the stone seems to breathe a damp chill straight into your bones. I can hear my boots scraping over flagstones worn smooth by centuries, and yes, the wind is whistling through a doorway that probably never sealed properly, even on its best day. Here is the honest bit you were waiting for. You probably want to survive a winter-esque night in here without a plan, a pile of blankets and a stubborn streak. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here. And if you're listening right now, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little campfire reaches. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. I nudge a door with my shoulder and step into a chamber so wide the fire across the way looks like a theatrical prop rather than an actual source of heat. The walls are massive, the kind that could shrug off a battering ram, and they absolutely shrug off warmth too. I can see my breath in tiny clouds, which is charming for about 12 seconds, and then becomes a reminder that my toes are filing a complaint. Old age wisdom says this is why medieval beds sat high off the ground. Cold air pools low, so you sleep on a little hill of hope. It works somewhat. Standing joke number 1. It's not a bedroom. It's a refrigerator that came with a complimentary moat. The air smells like smoke and damp wool and old timber. Somewhere a dog barks in the courtyard, and the sound lands on the wall and slides down into my ear like a reluctant guest. I press my hand to the stone and it's colder than the outside air. A reliable trick people knew long before thermometers. The builders, bless them, designed for siege, not for snug. If comfort is an army, this place has already been sacked. Academic debate would call this a contested domesticity, but I'm calling it drafts with extra steps. I pass into the great hall, which glows as if a small sun retired here and took up basket weaving. People gather close to the hearth, faces lit gold, backs chilled blue. You sit too near, your cheeks burn. You sit too far, your soul files for frostbite. We learn quickly. Warmth is a circle on the floor, not a room feature. Light joke number 2. The medieval thermostat was a chair you edged forward an inch at a time until your eyebrows started to smoke. Still, there's a ritual comfort here. Feasting in winter doubled as strategy. Body heat plus fire equals a kind of communal truce with the cold. An old proverb whispers that shared heat halves winter, which is exactly why no one leaves the hall early without at least 3 cloaks and a friend. When I climb the spiral stair, the temperature drops with impolite honesty. Every turn is a new ambition for frost. The torches sputter, and the smoke curls right back into my face because chimneys and flues were more aspirational than efficient. My boots crunch on rushes scattered across the floor of the landing, fresh enough to smell faintly of meadow, not yet at the stage where they qualify as a biological experiment. Quirky fact: household accounts sometimes list herbs mixed with the rushes, lavender, rosemary, even meadowsweet, to keep the room from smelling like a banquet died here. Did it warm the room? Marginally. Did it persuade the nose? Briefly. The scholarly debate here, if we want a posh phrase, centers on whether rushes served as meaningful insulation or were just medieval confetti for mud and spilled ale. I turn into the bedchamber, and there it is. The wooden mountain, 4 posts like tree trunks. Curtains drawn tight as a ship sails before a storm. The bed is not decoration. It's life support. You could take your portable bed with you when traveling. Wealthy folk did exactly that, because sleeping without curtains in a stone room is like camping in a church crypt with delusions of grandeur. Old practical wisdom says, breathe into a small space long enough, and you'll raise the temperature a few degrees. Not a miracle, but enough to take the bite off the air. I've got a warming pan leaning by the hearth, a little brass spaceship for embers that you slide between the sheets. Joke number 3. It's the original electric blanket minus the electricity, plus a statistically significant chance of setting your nightshirt on fire. I sit on the bed, and the straw tick complains like an old man who has seen too many winters. If you're rich, you stack a feather bed on top and sink into it like a pastry disappearing into custard. Exquisite, until you cannot roll over without a support team. If you're not, you fluff the straw as best you can and accept that some of it will attempt to negotiate directly with your skin. Quirky fact, people tucked hot stones wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed, or even sand in leather pouches. It's the medieval equivalent of hot water bottle meets beach holiday. Heated comfort, yes. Also a footnote in the long history of please let me not freeze. The wind finds every gap. I press a palm to the shutter. Some windows have oiled linen or thin horn panes, which turns sunlight into a buttery haze and winter into a creative writing prompt about endurance. The efficacy of translucent coverings, as one might say in the driest academic voice, varies by region and budget. My more direct translation: some help, some don't, and all of them rattle like a cart full of pans when the storm has opinions. Clothes? I am not sleeping in a breezy toga. I've got a long linen nightshirt, a cap to persuade the heat to stay where my thoughts live, and woolen socks that could probably stand up without me. Old wisdom insists, keep the head and feet warm and the body follows. It's true enough that even skeptics nod, and skeptics are just optimists wearing grumpy hats. I tie a strip of cloth round my wrists. People did that too, because fingers are tiny rebels who defect at the first sign of frost. The fire in the hearth has quieted to a red geometry of embers. I bank it, coax it, bribe it with a log. Smoke sneaks out, licks my eyes, and settles a fine soot on the tapestries. Here lies the paradox. The hearth that saves you also slowly paints your lungs. Scholars argue whether medieval households acclimatized to chronic smoke exposure or whether they eternally cursed it. I am confident both are true. Complaining was a winter sport and smoke was the undefeated champion. Light joke. In a castle, everything is smoked. Meat, cloth, guests, and occasionally the dog, who at least never complains as long as scraps are involved. I pull the curtains and the world becomes smaller, softer. The air inside the bed holds my breath in its cupped hands, and for the first time tonight, I believe sleep might be possible. The dog has already made executive decisions about my feet and refuses to consider public comment. Old age wisdom reminds me to lay a cloak over the top of the covers, fur side down. It turns the cocoon from hopeful to respectable. Outside, the wind is rehearsing for a career in theatre. Lots of drama, not much plot. In here, I can hear my heart slow down to the pace of embers. Before I drift, one last off-topic morsel. There's some medieval note advising people to store apples high in the rafters for winter. If you wake at night and the room smells faintly of fruit, that might be your midnight snack doubling as air freshener. Is this peer-reviewed? Let's call it anecdotal yet delicious. And as an academic debate phrase to tuck you in, any confident statement about medieval comfort levels should be treated as provisional, context-dependent, and subject to revision upon discovery of colder evidence. I settle, smiling at the ridiculousness and the ingenuity, at how a bed can be a room within a room, and a curtain can be a wall stronger than stone when the enemy is the air itself. If you listen closely, you can hear a very old truth whispering through the keyhole. Survival is a ritual, not an accident. By the time I reach the Great Hall again, the fire has muscled its way into a full roar, a square of orange defiance that everyone orbits like sleepy moths in heavy cloaks. I ease onto a bench, not too near, not too far, because in here distance is measured in degrees rather than steps. Too close, and your cheeks feel like toasted bread. Too far, and your spine writes poetry about ice. There is a comfort in the choreography. People drifting inward with bowls of pottage, elbows on trestles, hands extended to the blaze until joints unknot. And conversation begins to lift, not from confidence, but from warmth inching back into fingers. Old age wisdom puts it simply, never go to bed cold if you can help it. You bank heat in your bones here, so that the bed upstairs does not feel like a prank. Someone thumps down a platter near me, and the smell pulls me forward. Barley thickened to a gentle glue onions. Something meaty if fortune smiled, and a ribbon of steam that fogs the air just enough to make the rafters soft. The The smoke hangs there, stubborn and low, because these chimneys are grand shouty mouths that vent light as much as fumes. A skeptical scholar might say the thermodynamics are suboptimal. I would say the ceiling is seasoning the hall like a slow cooker. Quirky fact while we wait for spoons. Some feasts were timed in winter precisely because a crowd is an excellent heater. Pack enough singers, servers, and mildly competitive eaters into one room, and you create a weather system. Joke 1. Welcome to medieval central heating, also known as 50 sweaty cousins. The warmth here is a lesson in zones. Within an arm's reach of the hearth, you are actively cooking. At 2 arms' lengths, you are gently thawing. Beyond that, you are a decorative icicle with a cup. The hall knows this and arranges itself accordingly. Those with rank angle their chairs close to the fire and pretend they did not notice. Those without rank pretend not to notice that they noticed. I shuffle an inch forward with the kind of stealth usually reserved for cats and politicians. Academic debate pops up like a nosy neighbour. How effective were these great hearths as actual heaters? The consensus, such as it is, allows that the radiant heat was real but localised, that the rafters kept the best of it, and we kept the smoke. I accept this, while considering the delicious glow on my face a fair exchange for coughing later. A minstrel starts something cheerful on a lute that has seen braver winters than I have, and the notes skitter around the stone like mice with good news. Someone laughs too loudly, which is precisely how you know the cold is losing. Laughter is a temperature as much as a mood. Practical wisdom drifts down the table. Fill your belly, fill your mug, and fill your cloak with heat, then leave quickly and move faster. It is the nightly ritual: absorb, retreat, and hope the memory of warmth outlasts the staircase. Joke 2. The medieval Fitbit was your friend poking you and saying, "If you don't go now, you'll need a sled dog team to reach the bed." I watch the servants tending the fire. It is a craft, almost a religion, knowing when to lay a log flat for long burning and when to stand it to throw heat forward, where to rake coals to keep soup breathing, how to build the fire with a mind for later, for midnight, for the hour when the hall will be just embers and sighs. Old hands do it without thinking. Old age wisdom there. Leave a good heart in the hearth, and it will wake when you do. There's an ongoing academic squabble about whether households truly had fire wardens. The phrase is tidy. Reality was messier. Someone always watched, because someone always needed to. The air changes when platters are cleared. The heat is still here, but it has lost its edge, like a lion after lunch. Speech grows lower, the lute finds melancholy, and people begin the ritual of cloaks and hoods and quiet bargaining with their future selves. I can hear the hall adjusting to night, the rafters creaking back to their favourite positions, the shutters complaining about wind policies. A dog test drives several laps beneath the tables, snacking on ambitions. Quirky aside, dogs in halls had job titles: crumb auditor, bone relocation specialist, emotional support wolf. I scratch an ear as it passes. We exchange the understanding that our alliance is based on warmth and scraps in that order. Time to go. This is the part everyone dreads. The crossing from glow to corridor, from human weather to castle climate. I time it like a swimmer times a wave. Cloak ready, hood up, shoulders braced, and then a swift, decisive stand. The cold smacks me with the authority of a headmaster. My breath leaps out like it has been trying to escape for hours, and the warmth I hoarded puddles at my feet like spilled tea. Joke 3. The castle specialises in speed-running emotional arcs, cosy to tragic in 11 paces. The stair bites, the torches hiss and drizzle smoke. There is a collective wisdom in the way people climb at night, steady, economical, conserving warmth by moving but not panting. I pass a window slit where the moon makes a thin blade of light on the floor, and I swear I can hear the frost humming. Scholars would call this a subjective phenomenon. I prefer to call it the part of the night that thinks it is a poet. If I pause, I lose heat. If I rush, I sweat, and the sweat will punish me later. So I choose the middle road, the monk's pace, the old road builder's rule. Slow is smooth, smooth is warm. Up another turn, And there's a side hall where the air is oddly still. Tapestries on this stretch, hunting scenes and a unicorn with the expression of someone who knows the secrets of drafts, hang heavy, and the difference is palpable. The wall behind them still radiates cold, but the air near my cheek is less vicious. Old age wisdom again. Hang wool where wind argues, and argument softens. The academic debate phrase tries to sneak in. Were tapestries true insulation or conspicuous consumption that happened to be thick? The dry answer is both, but my face votes for I can move my jaw more easily. Please approve the budget. At a landing, I pass a brazier giving a stubborn glow, less a heater than a reminder. Someone has left a cup beside it, crusted at the rim from ale that decided to become a geology experiment. Quirky fact detour. A few townsfolk favoured charcoal braziers indoors. Urban coziness with a side order of risk, because carbon monoxide does not care about your vibes. In castles, braziers confuse fire and smoke into new collaborations. I prefer the hearth's honesty. It roars and coughs, and at least you know where you stand and where you shouldn't. Back into the hall for a moment because I forgot a glove. Classic error, the sort that prompts a sermon from any elder within a 5-mile radius. Old age wisdom is mercifully short. Never lose a glove in January. The glove is where you parked it, under the bench leg, like a faithful, disappointed squirrel. Retrieving it gives me a last blast of heat and laughter, a top-up for the road. If I could bottle this, I would retire as the wealthiest person in Europe with a product called Evening Hall 2, Ember Boogaloo. When we finally leave, the hall changes character. Without us, the benches become ribs in a sleeping beast. The fire keeps a red eye open. The dogs find their chosen geometries in front of the hearth, fancy themselves lions, and dream of sausages. The warmth we built together spreads thin and high, a ghost under the rafters. What remains on the floor are coins of heat where each body sat. I step through them, and it feels like walking a map of friendships. I climb again, carrying the hall in me like a lantern. That is the point, really. The Great Hall's warmth is not permanent. It is portable. You take it in your skin and in a memory that lasts just long enough to outpace the staircase. Scholars will argue, indeed they have, that the Great Hall was more spectacle than system, a theatre of heat rather than a solution. I'll give them that. But theatre saves people too, one performance at a time, and tonight the show was a success. At the top corridor, I pause in a pocket where the wind fails to arrive, and the echoes of the hall, music, cutlery, the kind of laughter that forgives everything, settle into a gentle aftertaste. There's a small old truth wrapped in that. Warmth likes company. We bank it together. We spend it apart. And if I'm honest, that is how every night in a castle is won or lost. Not by one fire, but by many shoulders leaning into it before we face the cold again, alone, but not entirely. Because the hall follows us like a kindly ghost. The corridor beyond the stair is a lung that never finished exhaling, cool, damp, and quietly insistent. I trail my fingers along the stone, and the wall answers with a clammy pulse of condensation, as if the castle were storing everyone's breath and returning it at interest. Old age wisdom says stone remembers weather better than people do. That's why the wall is cold at dawn, even after a day of weak sun, and why old masons tapped blocks with their knuckles like doctors listening for the hollows where damp collects. I press my ear to the masonry out of stubborn curiosity and hear only the faint tick of water sneaking down, a metronome for nights that last longer than patience. Joke 1. This corridor has the personality of a wet sock that went to university. A torch snaps behind me and throws a ragged halo forward, making the tapestries along the next stretch lift and settle as though they are breathing with me. The weave is thick, wool and a whisper of silk, and when I touch the bottom hem, my fingers come away with a fine dusting of soot and lanolin, a smell halfway between sheepfold and chapel. There's a long-running academic debate, sincerely it never dies, over whether these hangings were primarily insulation or ostentation. The dry phrasing I once read was performative warmth. which is the most scholarish way to say nice, but does it work? Here's my field report. Near the fabric, the draft is a rumour instead of a shout. Behind it, the wall still radiates winter like a grudge. So yes, they help. No, they do not save. And also, I would like more of them. Please and thank you. The passage twists left, and the air becomes still enough to hear a spider making executive decisions. A slit window waits there. No glass, just shutters and a panel stretched with oiled linen. In daylight, it turns the sun to pale honey. At night, it turns the wind into a musician who only knows one note. The linen trembles, releasing a tiny scent of cold-pressed oil, like a kitchen that forgot its purpose. Quirky fact, some houses use slices of horn instead, scraped thin until they behaved like stubborn glass and stained the world a permanent harvest yellow. The regional prevalence of horn pains, we are warned by sensible people in footnotes, is notoriously uneven. Translation: you will find one in the very place you least expect, and then not again for 100 miles. I wedge my palm along the shutter gap and feel the clean, brutal air outside. Hills and rivers make their own weather, and castles perched on a height might as well hang a sign. Wind training facility. The whistle through the crack climbs and dips, and I imagine the arrow slits all along the walls, practicing the same song. An accidental organ for winter. Old age wisdom says, block low first. Wind creeps under doors, not only through windows, so I kick a rolled cloth snake tighter along the threshold. Somewhere a grandparent nods in approval from a memory. It helps immediately, the way it always does, a small victory that costs nothing but attention. Joke 2. In a battle between physics and a tucked towel, the towel wins the morale war. I walk on, and a bare patch of wall without hangings delivers its own lecture. The stone is sweating. Tiny beads gather, join, run, and then vanish into the rushes. People used to call this the wall weeping, which is both poetic and extremely accurate. It's just the room's breath condensing and giving up, but it feels personal. This is where the health warriors in any century get louder. There's a pile of disputed wisdom about damp breeding melancholy, a favourite notion among physicians who adored the four humours like a band they discovered before everyone else. The overtly academic debate phrase ambles in. Whether cold, damp interiors materially promoted black bile disorders, or whether the diagnosis compensated for the castle's personality. My position is extremely rigorous. A wet pillow will ruin anyone's mood. I pause by a doorway and peek into a smaller solar where the air has manners. 2 walls wear tapestries thick as hedge banks. The third is boarded in oak panelling that hums gently when you rap it. The sound of trapped air doing its quiet job. It smells of beeswax and a century of hands. Someone has thought about winter in here. A bench stands beneath the south-facing window, a sun trap for mornings when light arrives like a late apology. Old age wisdom agrees that one should chase the sun, and here you can see the intent carved into the architecture. I pinch a corner of the hanging and peek behind. The stone is beaded with moisture. The gap is stuffed with teased toe and the heroic ends of old rags. The argument over whether this is proper insulation or domestic improvisation is moot. Both are true and both are warm. Back in the corridor, a servant scuttles past with a bucket and a look of someone who knows the castle. Secret map of drips. The North Stair's crying again, she mutters, which is a joke and not a joke. There is an old fix for that. Chalk lines on the stone where water tends to track, a kind of meteorology you can rub with your thumb. Quirky aside, I once saw a mason carve a tiny fish where persistent damp left its mark. His private river, swimming uphill through centuries. Not historically robust perhaps, but charming. Academic minds would file it under individual idiosyncrasy, while my heart files it under proof that people live here. I pass a chamber where tapestries have been taken down for beating, and the room suddenly feels like the inside of a well. The cold lifts the hair on my forearms with eager fingers. Without cloth, the acoustics sharpen. My footsteps clap, and the room claps back. It clarifies the question better than any treatise. Hangings do not turn a castle into a parlour. They turn a punishment into an inconvenience. Joke 3. They're less a coat, more a thick cardigan that says, "We are doing our best." The next window is horn, and the moon behind it blurs into a tender smudge. A moth has chosen the inside of the pane to dream against, its wings like folded paper fans. And for a soft second, the castle is kind. Old age wisdom reminds me to be grateful for small mercies. Light you can read by, a draft you can predict, a knot in a board that looks like an eye and convinces you someone is awake. Then the wind does a trick through a vent and slaps me with reality again, and we return to our scheduled program. If you kneel, you can feel the temperature settle in layers. Knees cold, chest cool, face tolerable. It validates the old habit of raised beds more than any lecture. Beneath the hangings, near the floor, the air slides like a lazy river, hunting ankles. Hence the fashion for heavy hems and boots you can remove with both hands and a prayer. There's a quiet body knowledge in all of this. Where to stand to talk without chattering teeth. How to lean on a jamb where the wood holds a little heat. How to keep your hand near your mouth so your breath warms your fingers while you pretend to think deeply. At a corner, a little shrine sits, just a candle stump and a wooden cross blackened by years of soot. I have learned that spiritual heat and physical heat share more space than arguments allow. People knelt here to say a quick word for the living and the fire together. The debate-minded will call that conflation. I call it practical theology. There is a quirky fact I cannot resist. Some households tucked sprigs of juniper above doorways, not only to ward off the sinister, but because the sharp scent was thought to scold stale air into behaving. Whether it works is, as they say, not conclusively demonstrated. It smells clean. That is sometimes enough. I end the corridor at a door that swells in winter and shrinks in summer, a timber barometer. My palm leaves a faint print on the damp, dark wood. On the other side is another chamber and another small weather system. The castle is not one climate. It is a continent, a mountain range of stairwells, a series of valleys in window bays, plains of cold flagstone, and forests of woven wool. Old age wisdom goes ahead of me like a lantern. Keep moving, keep noticing, keep patching the world where it frays. If stones can remember weather, so can we. And that's how we learn the path through a long night, not by a grand solution, but by 1,000 small agreements with the air. My boots begin to whisper instead of ring, and I know I've stepped from bare flagstone onto a fresh spread of rushes. They crunch faintly, a dry, papery sigh that smells of bankside and meadow even in the middle of stone. Someone cut them clean, let them sun, and laid them in a generous drift so the floor looks like a tame river running along the wall. Old age wisdom says, lay the new rushes before winter bites, thick enough to soften footfall, thirsty enough to drink the damp that weeps from the masonry. I stamp lightly to test them, and they answer with the sound of summer put away in orderly stacks. Joke 1, it's like walking on a salad that went to charm school. I crouch and pinch a handful. Among the green-grey blades are little surprises. Slivers of straw, a feather, and sprigs of herbs. Rosemary, lavender, maybe a bit of meadowsweet, crushed just enough to ghost the air with a polite perfume. It's a domestic magic trick. Quirky fact, accounts sometimes list sweet flag for floors. Its rhizomes smell pleasantly spicy when bruised, which is a far nicer experience than inhaling the biography of last week's stew. There is an overtly academic debate phrase I can hear rustling closer than the rushes. Whether these strewn floors functioned primarily as insulation, sanitation, or social performance. If you ask my knees, they will cast their vote for insulation-ish with an abstention for pest habitat if neglected. Because that's the shadow side. Rushes start virtuous and end comic tragic if you ignore them. Food scraps fall, ale tumbles, dogs rediscover bones with doctoral level enthusiasm, and the green carpet becomes a museum of recent events. Old age wisdom therefore adds the footnote. Change them often, rake them weekly, keep the top layer brisk. I've seen the difference. Here, the layer is tidy, the scent still lively, and the mice, always present, behave like polite tenants rather than landlords. Elsewhere, when the floor is left to fester, you can feel the room wrinkle its nose at itself. Joke 2. Rushes are the medieval equivalent of that one friend's sofa, cozy, beloved, and absolutely not to be investigated with a blacklight. A servant appears with a willow rake, long springy teeth designed to stir without gouging the flag beneath. She moves in swift, practiced arcs, lifting the topmost layer, teasing out anything that has aspirations to become a fossil, smoothing the rest as if making a bed for the floor. The sound is satisfying. A soft rasp, a gentle sift, the hush of things reorganized. We exchange a nod. She remarks, "Better underfoot, better under lung," and there is old wisdom wrapped neatly in 6 words. It is not simply about cushioning, it is about keeping the damp from rising to the sheets at night, the way a thatch keeps rain from the beam. Scholars would call this a microporous buffer against capillary moisture. I prefer her phrasing. I walk, and the sound of my step is no longer the hard syllable of stone, but a softened consonant, the castle speaking through wool instead of iron. There's a subtle warmth near the floor, not heat exactly, but the absence of cold's sharpest teeth. In a house that bleeds warmth like a cracked jug, any edge you can blunt is worth the trouble. Old age wisdom whispers another trick. Scatter the rushes thicker where children play or elders sit. Thin them where the door swings, and never pile them high enough to hide a rogue coal. The line between comfort and calamity is thin as a reed. A memory slides in, a hall I visited in late winter where the rushes had done their long, faithful duty. The scent was no longer meadow, but pantry and kennel and boots, an autobiography of a season. A cat walked through like a queen inspecting subjects, and the rushes made a sound like paper applause with every stride. Quirky aside, medieval moralists occasionally took aim at sloppy floors with exquisite insults, comparing some halls to middens with furniture. They were not entirely wrong, but then again, they rarely had to host 12 damp hunters and 4 dogs at short notice during a sleet storm. The academic mind might propose normative cleanliness discourses, while the practical mind reaches for the rake. Between the rushes and the wall hangs a border of cloth, an extra footer of fabric that hides the line where damp meets plant. I lift it and look. The underside is darkened, but the rushes along the margin are dry, smug in their success. This is the bit we seldom narrate when we romanticize tapestries and beds. The labor underneath, the constant, quiet choreography of laying, fluffing, changing, and scenting. Old age wisdom doesn't gloat. It just shows up with a bundle and a broom and turns a hostile floor into a hospitable one again. I drop onto a stool and feel how the rush layer forgives hard edges. Chairs sit steadier, benches wobble less. A toppled mug lands with a thud instead of a shatter. Children tumble here with fewer bruises. Elders can put their feet down and not feel a lightning bolt complaint from bone to hip. Is it insulation? The academic debate returns, clipping words carefully. Measurable thermal benefit may be limited. I will grant them their graph while I keep my toes under the table and grin. Joke 3. Please write me a paper titled Quantifying Coziness. There's another quiet function we forget. The way rushes slow the spread of mess. In a world of open hearths, spilled stews, and boots that have had personal experiences with mud, the floor absorbs, disguises, and delays. Sweep at night, and you take the day's story outside. Leave it, and the story tells itself to the room all week. Quirky fact. Some households sprinkled chalk or sand along main walking paths, through rushes so that detours and shortcuts were visible in the scuff. A medieval version of "Please stay on the carpet runner." I pluck a sprig of lavender from the mix and roll it between my fingers. The scent arrives in a tiny blue breath, persistent, cheerful, unpretentious. It wins no wars and cures no colds, but it changes how your head meets the room. Old age wisdom knows this. Tuck pleasant things into hard places. A crumb of sweetness in a loaf of rye. A melody in a rough-lipped hall. A herb in a floor that has to be both pillow and sponge. Scholars may debate the efficacy. The nose, the memory, and the softness in shoulders say, "Thank you, that will do." Further along the corridor, the rushes step up into the chamber, and their presence announces that several lives happen here. Sewing, mending, talking, eating. Tiny beads tell me someone has threaded pearls over this very patch. A singed edge tells me a coal landed and was caught in time. A coin glinting like a shy fish suggests luck for the next finder. The floor is a diary that forgives spelling. You can trace the day's weather in the dampness, the household's temper in the tidy lines, and the season in the smell. I stand and smooth the layer with my boot. The fibers settle like hair under a comb, and the room looks groomed, ready. Old age wisdom offers one last instruction for the night. Turn the rushes near the bed before you sleep, so your first step in the morning finds a fresher place. It's a small kindness you can do for your future self, which is a habit I recommend in matters far beyond floors. The academic phrase that fits, anticipatory domestic practice, makes it sound grand. It isn't. It's just love disguised as housekeeping. When I leave the chamber, the sound of my footfalls returns to stone, and the castle returns to its native tongue. I carry the meadow scent a little way with me, the way warmth from the hall travels in skin. In a place that cannot be made truly warm, you gather warmth in pockets, in hangings, in bed curtains, in bowls of stew, in rushes underfoot. Each is imperfect on its own. Together, they make a life that is bearable, and sometimes, beautifully, more than that. I touch the wall and feel it still weeping its tiny river. The rushes will drink and hold. We will walk and sleep. Winter will push. We will answer softly, over and over, until the green returns outside and the floors smell like summer without help. I close the door behind me and take stock of the bed as if it were a small country with complicated customs. Linen, wool, fur. The layers stack like a treaty negotiated over centuries between people and cold. First, the undersheet, smooth and cool and honest. Then, the upper linen, a softer one that has known enough washings to learn manners. Over that, the woolen blankets, one grey, one the colour of a rain cloud about to apologise, and crowning the lot, a fur throw that looks like it could hold a grudge against February and win. Old age wisdom says, linen to breathe, wool to guard, fur to finish. If you reverse that order, you invite sweat, which is treacherous in winter. Sweat is the spy that tells the cold where to attack. Joke 1. My bedtime strategy is less aesthetic and more onion cosplay. I run my hands across the fabrics, feeling the different languages they speak. Linen whispers of fields, of flax pulled and retted and scutched and heckled. A whole verb parade that ends in a cloth cool against the skin. Wool hums of sheep on hillsides, and lanolin that refuse to entirely let go, a subtle oil that still remembers rain. The fur, fox, lamb, makes no sound but the small, smug silence of something evolved to keep its original owner alive in weather that ruins plans. There is an overtly academic debate phrase hovering here about textile hierarchies as indicators of status versus necessity. We can argue sums and symbolism all night, but I know this. In a room where your breath writes poems in the air, fibers are not fashion, they are tools. I sit and test the give of the straw tick beneath, the base layer upon which this domestic fortress is built. It crackles faintly, a dry sibilance that announces both freshness and imminent potential for mischief. Straw shifts. That is its way. Old age wisdom says beat and fluff the tick frequently and turn it with the seasons, head to foot, foot to head. Keep it aired when you can. If a feather mattress lies above it, you've moved up in the world. Down drifts like a cloud with opinions, and you will sink until the edges decide who you are. Quirky fact. Featherbeds often travelled with owners like pampered ambassadors. Records note porters carrying them as carefully as relics. There's a reason. A familiar bed makes an unfamiliar room survivable. I lay out what I call my armour. On the chair, a long linen nightshirt, a woolen robe that's halfway to a blanket, socks so thick they deserve names, a cap to keep heat from bolting out the top like a thief, and waiting like a faithful squire a plain cloak to throw over everything if the night decides to rehearse being the Arctic. People imagine grand furs and velvet, and yes, sometimes. But the daily triumph is a good weave and a nightcap that does not itch. Old age wisdom lands like a maxim from a sharp aunt. Keep your head warm, and your temper follows. Joke 2. Fashion bloggers would hate this outfit. Survival bloggers would ask for affiliate links. I thread my fingers through the bed curtains, heavy wool lined with linen, and draw them closed. The sound is a hush. The outside world becomes suggestion rather than fact. Air still creeps in through seams like a polite burglar. But the worst of the drafts are baffled by the cloth and left to sulk in the room beyond. This small theatre of fabric creates a pocket climate, a private weather where breath accumulates gently and the bite of the room is blunted. Academic phrasing would call it a microclimatic intervention. I call it a hug with architecture. Old age wisdom adds a familiar tip. Leave a palm-wide gap near the head for fresh air, or you'll wake with a head like a church bell. Storage becomes strategy. I tuck a warming stone, wrapped in a bit of worn linen, at the foot. A warming pan waits nearby, brass lid punched with small stars so the embers inside can breathe. Ivy learned to swish it briskly across the sheets and keep it moving. Pause too long, and you engrave the history of your mistake onto the bed. Quirky aside, some householders swore by bags of heated sand, which mould to the toes with a devotion unmatched by stones. There's a whiff of beach holiday about it, if your beach also features armoured men and a Latin-speaking chaplain. The layering is not merely vertical, it is strategic, a fortress that recruits. If the wind keenly accuses the north wall, I'll add an extra wool along that curtain side. If the floor feels like a lake that forgot to be water, a folded cloak slips beneath the mattress edge to shield my calves. Old age wisdom is relentless in its pragmatism. Use what you have where it hurts most. Scholars argue status signalling through textiles, and I do not disagree. The richest beds were inventories of wealth you could nap on. But I have also seen a poor bed make a genius of economy. Old sailcloth repurposed as an underlay, a patched blanket lined with bits of worn-out hose, fur trimmings stitched together into a surprisingly formidable throw. Necessity is a tailor with steady hands. I shake the pillows, 2 linen bags, one loose with feathers, one firmer with chaff, and build a slope that keeps the nose clear when the air stings. If you think this is fussy, try waking in the night and discovering your breath has decided to curl in your moustache and freeze there like avant-garde sculpture. Joke 3. Medieval skincare routine. Don't get icicles. Quirky fact. Some people tied a light scarf over the mouth in the worst cold, believing it warmed the breath and kept the chest from complaint. Whether it's medicine or myth, I've tried it. It helps enough to keep, which is the practical standard around here. I lay out a second set of socks, within reach for the midnight hour. This is less luxury than foresight. If I step out to the chamber pot, or the hearth to stir the embers, the first pair will hoard the cold with a vindictiveness uncommon in clothing. Old age wisdom. Change what is wet. Warmth hates damp even more than you do. On the rail I hang tomorrow. S-shirt, where it can learn tomorrow. S temperature tonight. Close enough to the bed that my body warms the fabric a little while I sleep. It's a small courtesy to the morning self, a down payment on not swearing at dawn. The fur at the top. Its weight changes the mood of the bed. A good fur does not simply lie there. It proposes a treaty. You give me your stillness. I give you my retained heat. There is an ongoing academic debate phrase about ethics and procurement of pelts. And yes, there are hard stories at the far edges of luxury. Here, where the wind pries at shutters and the walls perspire frost, a fur is not a trophy. It is a tool that keeps joints from stiffening into future aches. I've seen elders stroke the nap before sleep, the way one strokes an old friend's hand. It is not sentimentality. It is remembering what works. I step into the cocoon and pull everything into place. A tuck here at the shoulder to keep the draft from exploring. A fold there at the hip so the weight lands where it comforts. The cap down over the ears until sound becomes woolly and kind. The bed does not become warm instantly. It becomes not cold, which is the start. The rest is up to the body, which will lend heat by degrees if the fortress keeps its promise. A simple truth presents itself, the sort elders share with a shrug. Comfort is not a burst. It is a slow accumulation. We build it with cloth and patience. Before I close my eyes, I pat around in the dark for the small things that matter. Flint and steel within reach. A candle stub in a shallow dish, the spoon I left by the bed in case the stew pot beckons at midnight. Quirky aside, some travellers swore by sleeping with a slice of onion under the bed to shame the air into freshness. I can neither confirm nor deny. I can confirm that onions have opinions. I adjust the curtain gap, a hand's width, not more, and listen to the room beyond. The wind filigrees along the shutter. The embers mutter in their red grammar. The fur settles like a tame beast. Scholars will write about domestic strategies for microthermal stability. I will sleep inside a fortress of fabric and wake without the taste of frost in my teeth. That seems a fair measure of success. The curtains breathe in and out with me, a soft pulse against my knuckles where I've left that palm-wide gap. Inside this little tent, the air is already changing, less bite, more hush. I can hear, in the thin space between cloth and mattress, the tiniest shuffle of threads settling, as if the bed is a theatre and the audience has just gone quiet before the play resumes. Old age wisdom would tell you the trick is not to chase warmth in a room like this, but to build a small country where your body becomes the hearth. So I lie still, and I can feel it happen. The slow radiance, the way the linen loses its steel and learns my shape, the way the cold moves like a sulky cat from hip to foot to nothing. Joke 1. Welcome to my 4-poster microclimate. Membership fees include a hat and reasonable expectations. I lift the curtain an inch and peek into the room beyond. The shutter trembles, a silver thread of moonsheen slipping around the edge. Out there, the air is busy, argumentative. In here, it is polite. There is an overtly academic debate phrase that comes to mind: the psychological versus physiological benefits of enclosed sleeping spaces. I will concede the mind's role, but the nose knows. The breath warms this cubicle faster than hope warms the corridor. I can actually count it if I'm patient. 3 minutes to stop clenching. 5 to stop noticing my toes. 10 to remember what comfort feels like after stone has made a feast of my heat. The canopy above me is a roof in miniature. Heavy cloth strung on cords. More tent than ornament. I reach up and pluck one of the bed ropes. Hemp. Rough. Doing its ancient duty of holding everything together. Quirky fact. The phrase, sleep tight, gets dragged into this conversation a lot with the theory that you tightened the ropes before bed. Scholars roll their eyes so hard you can hear it. The etymology is, as they say, contested. Still, ropes do slacken and ropes do get tightened, and when you pull them snug, the mattress stops trying to imitate a hammock with poor life choices. Old age wisdom says tend what holds you up, whether it is rope or routine. On coldest nights, I lower the curtains entirely to the floor and weight the corners with the spare cloak so the draft cannot argue its way in. I leave that gap by my face though, because a sealed bed wakes you with a woolly headache and a medieval desire to chew the furniture. Air must move a little, like money and grudges. The inside smells faintly of beeswax, wool, and the lavender I tucked between the pillows earlier. One of those small, not quite medical mercies people have always used to trick the night into being nicer. Joke 2. Aromatherapy, but make it 12th century and highly suspicious of citrus. The dog makes a decision and climbs to the bench at the foot of the bed, curling into a crescent that warms my ankles by implication. In the hierarchy of heating strategies, this is the one that comes with ears. Some houses forbade dogs in beds on grounds of dignity. Other houses understood that dignity is a summer luxury. Academic debates regarding domestic animals and propriety circle like hawks. But my ankles vote canine every time. Old age wisdom cameo. Never argue with a warm dog in January. You learn how to move inside a bed like this. How to turn without drawing a gale through the curtains. How to tuck your shoulder and lift the fur with the back of your hand so the weight falls back into place, rather than sliding onto the floor like a fleeing nobleman. The ritual becomes muscle memory. If I stretch my foot to the stone-warmed bundle at the bed's end, it gives back a decided, sensible heat, as if to say, we planned for this moment together, you and I. I have done the other thing too, rushed to bed without banking warmth in the hall, without warming the sheets, and then lay there as the cold gnawed like a mouse with good teeth. Old age wisdom reiterates its favourite sermon, do tomorrow's comfort tonight. The canopy creates a privacy the room respects. Voices beyond are softened to the murmurs of people trying to be kind. The fire's faint crackle becomes punctuation rather than plot. In crowded houses, the bed itself is the room, the only door you can close that no one else must pass. There's a running academic conversation about the bed as a status object versus the bed as a functional shelter. Yes, the best are carved like small cathedrals. Yes, the curtains can perform heraldry and wealth. But tonight, what matters is that the curtain edge does not flutter when the wind throws another opinion at the shutter. I prop up on an elbow and test the edges. At the headboard, a line of stitching catches the light where the wool meets the linen lining. A seam mended by a careful hand, probably in autumn when the household did its wintering over chores. Quirky aside, some families kept a separate set of heavier winter curtains and swapped them the way we swap duvets. If that sounds fussy, consider that the difference between a nap and a night of sleep can be exactly the weight of fabric you choose. In a pinch, people pinned extra cloth along the sides, a pragmatic, slightly lumpy solution that earns its place by morning. There is a superstition tucked into my habits that I won't quite call a superstition. I stroke the canopy edge twice before sleep, a small private courtesy to the thing that shelters me. Old age wisdom would classify this as gratitude, which is rarely misplaced. The bed answers by creaking, contentedly, or merely because wood does not mind being dramatic. I cannot tell. Joke 3. Everything in a castle creaks like it is auditioning for the role of ominous. Even the blankets. The curtain gap lets in a slim spear of colder air, the right kind, the wakefulness-saving kind. I breathe through it, imagining the bed as a bellows and myself the fire it feeds. There's a physiological pleasure in feeling your own body become useful in that way, not mere passenger, but participant. Scholars might call it embodied thermoregulation practices, and they would not be wrong. I call it listening. After a while, the cold is not a threat, but a contour. It shapes the way I lie, the way I speak in low winter voices, the way I reach for the warming stone and tuck it somewhere new every hour. Beyond the curtains, the room manages its own rhythms. The ember collapses. A little hiss means a sap bubble has reached a decision. A string in the shutter hums. The bed filters these sounds like leaves over a stream until they blur into a single gentle constant. That constant is what sleep follows. In summer, when the curtains feel like unnecessary theatre, I always forget how kind the soft enclosure sounds until winter returns and proves the point again. Old age wisdom is not about never forgetting, but about remembering faster each time. I consider, as the last of the chill leaves my shoulders, just how much of this is invention versus inheritance. Someone worked out the curtain trick. Someone discovered the right gap for air. Someone learned the cadence of warming pan and warming stone. The academic in me wants to footnote each practice. The human in me wants to pat the bedpost and say thank you to every hand that passed the knowledge along. Quirky fact to end on. In some inventories, beds are listed with names, as if they were half object, half relative. I understand it. Here, under the tent that makes weather a polite suggestion, you make pacts with furniture. The fur slumps back into place. The linen is no longer cold, merely cool. The dog snores like a modest saw. I let the curtain fall, the gap exactly where my mouth finds it without looking. The canopy holds the air quiet around my head. The room can rage a little if it wants. In here we have agreed to a different climate, one that recognizes the sovereignty of sleep and the rule of small, sensible rituals. Old age wisdom signs the treaty at the bottom. Keep your head warm, your feet dry, and your patience long. The rest follows, one softened breath at a time. The straw tick answers my weight with that friendly complaint, crick crick, as if every stalk has a story and insists on telling it just when I am trying to get comfortable. I flatten my palm along the ticking and feel the little ridges where someone stitched it in boxed channels to keep the fill from migrating into a single empire under my knees. Old age wisdom says, stitch the bed like a field, square it, turn it, reap the lumps before they harvest you. The straw has a clean, dusty scent that makes me think of barns, of long afternoons when the sun pretends work is optional. Joke 1. My mattress smells like a well-behaved scarecrow, which is more than I can say for some inns I've met. Feathers are another country. On nights when a feather bed rides above the straw, I fold into it like pastry into cream, and there is a moment, always the first 30 seconds, where I believe in angels and bad decisions simultaneously. The give is so forgiving that my shoulders sink, my hips sink, and then my knees consider emigrating to the next parish. Quirky fact, feather beds of real quality were mixed. Down for loft, small feathers for resilience, sometimes even a touch of chaff for structure. A mattress that is all down can feel like drowning politely. There's an overtly academic debate phrase about distribution of feather beds across social strata, and the honest answer is uneven as winter daylight. Townburgers, prosperous farmers, urban guildmasters, many slept with feathers. The poor mostly made do with straw, chaff, bracken, or heather, which crackle less poetically and poke more enthusiastically. I punch the feather-filled pillow, and it answers with a gentle woof, settling under my hand like a tame cloud. If you've never heard a pillow make a noise like a sighing pigeon, you have not lived luxuriously enough or visited enough aunts. Old age wisdom from those aunts. Air the feathers in frost. Hang the ticking out when the morning knife's clean and bright. The cold scolds mites, and the sun finishes the sermon. I've done it, and I swear the bed comes back inside smelling like fresh laundry and smugness. There is science in it. Low temperatures doing their tidy work, and also ceremony. Beds need rites just as much as chapels. Feathers have their own politics. Who gets them? Who keeps them? Who inherits them when someone dies, and the world must be redistributed in lists written with a steady hand. The inventory might read, 1 feeder bed, 2 bolsters, 3 pillows, and the line carries more warmth than most poetry. The academic debates about textiles as movable wealth have footnotes sharp enough to shave with, and they are not wrong. A bed is money you can sleep on, comfort you can lend to a guest, a dowry that whispers, your winters will be kinder. Joke 2. If you think cryptocurrency is volatile, try valuing a feather mattress after a cat has taken a personal dislike to its seam. The straw tick below requires a different maintenance. I unlace a corner of the ticking, pull out a handful, and tease it apart, listening for the soft hiss as stems separate. You can feel the quality in your hands. Straw that was cut when it was dry and mature behaves, while damp straw tries to live again in inconvenient ways. Old age wisdom says refresh the fill by season. Add bracken in autumn for springiness. Replace with fresh rye straw after harvest. Consider oat straw if you must, but expect more dust. Each has a personality. Bracken is springy and faintly medicinal if you like the smell of fern. Rye is sturdy, oat is dusty, heather smells like the moor and stabs you with tiny poems. I slide the fill back and smooth the ticking. The fabric itself matters too. Linen ticking with a tight weave keeps the pokes at bay and the feathers corralled where they belong. There's a recurrent academic phrase, material culture of sleep, that sounds like a museum label, but really just means people thought very hard about these little decisions because their noses, spines, and mornings depended on them. I think hard too when a quill end escapes and negotiates directly with my shoulder blade. It is astonishing how one disloyal feather can ruin your belief in civilization. Allergies are not a modern invention. On certain days the featherbed conspires with my nose, and we stage a duet of sneezes I would prefer not to make public. When it happens, I swap the feather bolster for a chaff-filled one, and the rebellion subsides. Quirky fact: chaff pillows, despised by snobs, are quietly brilliant, firm, cool, and respectful of your sinuses. The old housekeeper's wisdom: sleep with what makes you quiet, not with what makes you proud. She would probably also remind me to beat the tick outside with a willow switch, standing upwind like someone who has learned the hard way. There are sounds you learn to love. The featherbed murmurs when I roll. The straw tick chuckles when I sit. The rope lattice beneath makes a shy creak like a polite violin. I reach down and find the rope's tension. If it sags, everything above tries to become a valley. Old age wisdom again. Tighten the lattice before your back writes you a letter. This is where the contested sleep tight slinks back into the conversation. And although etymologists will line up to scold us, in practice I still pull a knot firm and think, there, tighter, better, sleep tighter, whether or not the phrase owes me rent. There's a particular pleasure in a well-layered bed, a straw base for resilience, a feather crown for kindness, blankets arranged with malice toward drafts, and the fur like a treaty signed in good faith. Scholars may argue over thermal gradients within bed architecture, and I cheer them on with a spoon from under the covers. In here I can feel it like contours on a map. Cool at the nose, warm at the shoulder, toasty at the toes where the warming stone sulks when ignored. Joke 3. My toes are high-maintenance clients. They require consistent communication and hot rocks. I think about who sleeps in what and how that shapes the night. Children bundled two to a straw tick in a truckle dragged near the hearth. Grandparents granted the featherbed because joints do not negotiate well with hard truths. Travellers given whatever holds still sometimes a sack of leaves if the hayloft is busy doing hayloft things. Old age wisdom has a generosity clause. The warmest bed finds the coldest bones. It is not always observed, but when it is, the house breathes easier. Feathers demand a periodic plumping of morality. Where did they come from? Who plucked whom, when, and with how much kindness? The debate about live plucked down versus slaughter by product is not only modern, and it is not soft. If I have a choice, I choose the bed that came from birds already bound for the pot, and I sleep better for knowing the story is less cruel. Ethics do not raise the temperature, but they do lengthen the exhale. In a castle where comfort is bargaining, I prefer clean bargains. I roll onto my side, and the featherbed gives like a friend who knows how to hug without making it a big thing. The straw below offers the counterpressure that keeps me aligned, more honest than glamorous. Linen cools my cheek, and the wool blankets lift a little when I breathe, and settle when I don't. Quirky aside, some physicians once recommended sleeping on hard boards to purify humours, which is hilarious until your back hurts and you consider writing them a thank you note. The academic debate phrase here would be medical prescriptivism versus lived practice. And lived practice wins whenever a person has to wake up at dawn and function. Some nights the featherbed is too much. Heat builds, damp follows, and I slide the featherbed aside like a theatre curtain to spend a few hours on straw and blankets only. It is cooler, cleaner, more austere, the monastic setting on the bed's control panel. Old age wisdom flex. Know when to change your plan. A good bed is not just a tool. It is an instrument you play according to the weather, your age, your cough, the number of dogs campaigning for ankle rights, and whether tomorrow brings a ride through sleet or a day at the loom. By the time I finish fussing, the bed has become itself, layered, tuned, ready. The feather sighs, the straw agrees, the ropes hum content in their private rope language. I tuck the covers at the shoulder, where drafts like to gossip, and slide my feet to the hot stone that has already adopted my cause. Scholars can keep their tables. I have this map under my ribs. Old age wisdom writes the last instruction on the night. Smooth the pillow, bless the bed, and let sleep find you where the feathers float and the straw holds firm. The dog has settled with a grunt at my feet, and that simple act of loyalty alters the climate more efficiently than any doctrine. Heat is a communal project. I have learned this from fires and from faces. Old age wisdom states it without romance. 2 bodies share warmth better than 1, and 3 better than 2. Practical, mildly scandalous, and occasionally controversial when propriety wants its turn at the lectern. There is an overtly academic debate phrase that circles this topic: the social ethics of co-sleeping practices, and the papers are as long as winter. I will shorten them to a sentence. When the frost sharpens, people move closer, and the rules soften like wax. Tonight, the bed is mine, but many nights are less solitary. I think of those evenings when we stack the room like a lifeboat, children tucked in truckles drawn near, a cousin camping on a pallet by the hearth, an elder nested like a saint within a ring of bolsters. Joke 1. Medieval interior design is 90%. How many humans can we safely stack near the fire without violating building codes invented 6 centuries later? The geometry matters. You do not place a child where a draft tests the shutter. You do not ask Grandad to climb a ladder to a loft bed unless you are also applying to be declared an enemy of the family. Bodies have predictable climates. We arrange them the way a sensible gardener arranges plants. The dog's warmth pulls at my ankles. There's a politics to animals in sleeping spaces. Some households enforce rules. No dogs in beds, no cats in cradles. Others have rules that read more like aspirations. Quirky fact, there are notes in old household accounts for dog blankets, which delights me because it suggests not only indulgence, but recognition, a practical nod to the fact that a content dog is a stationary heater rather than a wandering heat thief. The cat, if present, patrols with the brisk professionalism of a night watchman, and then chooses to occupy the warmest person with contemptuous precision, thus improving that person's chances of survival by at least 10%, peer review pending. I have slept in inns where the communal bed was not a metaphor, but a mathematics lesson. 6 strangers arranged north-south, north-south to maximize elbow diplomacy, the bed curtained less for modesty than to trap a pocket of sane air. The first 5 minutes are a negotiation of knees, a treaty between snorers and coughers, and then, miracle or mere biology, the combined heat tames the room. Academic-minded folks might term this thermal collectivization of sleep environments. I call it teamwork. Old age wisdom gives the addendum: choose your company with care if you can. If you cannot, choose your corner with cunning. Company alters the sounds of the night in ways that please the nervous system. A second breath resets your own. A child's sigh pulls the tension out of your shoulders. An elder's steady snore is a metronome for your patience and a reassurance that tomorrow's stories will still have a teller. Joke 2. If you want ASMR, try 3 Generations Breathing. It is the original sleep playlist with occasional bonus track titled Someone Kicked Off the Blankets. Of course, there are hazards. Lice prefer festivals to solitude, coughs are more generous than we require, and human feet are blunt instruments at 2 in the morning. But when the wind is writing a manifesto against comfort, company wins. There is a tension here between warmth and propriety that households navigate with the grace available to them. Beds can be fortress, parlour, infirmary, nursery. When the cold bullies the bones of the very young or very old, propriety often takes a night off. I have lifted a fevered toddler into the crook of my arm, felt their heat and fragility, and understood in my ribs why the phrase "make room" can be a prayer. Old age wisdom is ruthless in its kindness. Keep the vulnerable warm, and you will sleep better yourself. The academic debate phrase returns to say, co-sleeping norms varied by region, class, and period. And yes, but the body cares less about region than about survival. Sometimes company is not in the bed, but near it. A chair pulled to the curtain's edge, someone dozing with chin to chest, watching the ember and listening for the cough that needs water. A visitor refused a ride to the village in sleet and granted a pallet by the hearth instead, because roads in this weather are gambling and the house has dice to spare. Quirky aside, I once shared a room with a travelling piper who swore he could keep his hands warm by imagining reels at speed. Pure fiction, but the show he put on for his fingers kept both of us entertained until the stew was ready. Placebo is still heat when it relaxes the shoulders. I have also shared warmth with strangers, separated by a bed curtain and a whispered agreement. In an inn, the curtain is law. You face your side, they face theirs. You both pretend the noises you make are made by ghosts or saints. Academic phrasing would call it ritualized mutual discretion. I call it good manners with a blanket. Old age wisdom recommends one last practical safeguard in such arrangements. Keep your purse under your pillow and your boots within a toe's reach. No one is at their most moral at 3 a.m. in February. There is folk wisdom about sleeping with one's head to the east, or with iron near the bed to discipline bad dreams, or with a sprig of rue to ward off unhelpful visitors, human and otherwise. I am not immune to charms when the wind is practicing. The iron nail on the windowsill satisfies the part of me that enjoys partnerships with superstition. Quirky fact: some people believed placing bread crust under the pillow would discourage nighttime nibblers of the rodent persuasion by giving them better options. I prefer a cat personally, but I respect the ingenuity. Joke 3. If you find yourself explaining to a mouse the concept of a decoy snack, it may be time to re-evaluate your heating strategy. When a group shares a bed, etiquette evolves. Feet point opposite ways to limit argument. The earliest riser sleeps at the edge nearest the curtain and the fire. The night waker, with the tender bladder, bargains for aisle access with favours at breakfast. Privacy is not absent. It is redrawn. It becomes tone of voice, angle of shoulder, economy of movement. The blanket is a commons, and the commons requires governance. Old age wisdom codifies it quietly. Be still, be kind, be warm. There's a sweetness to a crowded room when the first thawing happens. Conversation slows, jokes get lazier and kinder, and someone remembers a song that does not require a high note. Heat makes philosophers of the even moderately comfortable. A servant shares a tale from her village. A guest compares winters like scars. An elder drops a proverb that feels older than the stones. The academic mind might label this conviviality as adaptive strategy, and I have no quarrel with the phrase if it means we all get an extra blanket for our tongues. Of course, company is also heat in motion. A sleeping baby radiates like a small sun. A shepherd's cloak draped across two laps becomes an instant tent. A shared cup of something hot passes hand to hand, conferring courage each time. Quirky aside, mulled ale seasoned with a clove and a dream has no medical degree, but it makes friends with your chest, and that is often the more relevant qualification. There is a reason the oldest advice remains current. Warm from within, warm from without, and when in doubt, warm together. Here at the foot of the bed, the dog sighs and tucks its nose beneath its tail, creating a closed-loop heating system that older engineers would have praised. I pull the fur a little higher, feel the friendly bump of a second pair of feet, mine, bundled in 2 layers of socks, and let the notion of solitude loosen its laces. The castle is not designed for one. It is a machine run by many. Old age wisdom closes the ledger for the night with this balance. You can endure alone, but you can rest together. The debate will continue in halls and footnotes, in sermons and gossip. In here, the verdict is rendered by toes and breath. The verdict is yes, company wins. I set my night kit out like a soldier laying tools before dawn. Linen nightshirt, woolen wrapper, a cap that turns my head into a respectable acorn, and wraps for wrists and ankles because fingers and toes are notorious deserters. Old age wisdom has a directness that makes me smile. Dress the ends and the middle will manage. It is not a fashion maxim, it is hydraulics for heat. Joke 1. Tonight's look is monastic chic, which is to say, nothing pinches and everything apologizes for existing. I shake out the nightshirt, a good length to the calf. cut generous so I can curl up without it auditioning for the role of tourniquet. Linen against skin first, always. It pulls the damp off you like a quiet friend and does not hold grudges. The wool robe goes over it, weighty but not bossy, a weave with enough tooth to trap air. Air is the secret. Layering is a craft of pockets, of little still spaces warmed by your own breath and blood. The overtly academic debate phrase here would be optimizing convective resistance via textile stratification, which is delightfully accurate and impossible to whisper yourself to sleep with. I prefer the old house rule, many thin warms better than one thick. A single heavy blanket is a tyrant, two lighter ones are a coalition government, and while they may argue, they get more done. I pull on socks. First a soft linen pair that sits smooth on the skin, then a wool pair with a forgiving ankle. If the night is ambitious, I add a third, short felted booties that look like two unhappy muffins. Quirky fact, some folks used to sleep with separate bed socks, never worn outside shoes, on the sound logic that grit is the enemy of bliss. The difference to your heels and temper is immediate. Old age wisdom adds a flourish. Keep a spare pair by the bed for the 3 a.m. Dash to the pot. Wet wool is a vendetta. Hands next. I wind narrow bands of wool around my wrists, snug enough to encourage circulation, loose enough that I can still light a taper without discovering new swear words. There's an old trick where you tuck the ends under like a ship's cleat. It looks quaint. It works. Fingers get light mitts if the shutter sulks. I leave the right index free for flint and key, the small negotiations you make with the night. The cap is last, liners, and then wool if needed. My ears hold more opinions than a bishop. Covering them converts those opinions into cooperation. Old age wisdom, handed down with the same firmness as pastry secrets. Warm the head, the rest follows, and if it does not, at least your thoughts will be civil. Night clothes in a cold house are not pajamas as much as armor you can sleep in. People imagine velvet and lace. I imagine felled seams and generous gussets. I want the sleeves to ride when I reach for a candle, and to fall back when I settle. The neck to sit high enough to deny drafts and low enough that breath can escape without condensing into a tiny weather system under my chin. There's a miniature academic quarrel over whether people slept naked for health or dressed for warmth. The answer, of course, is both and sometimes. Context dependent, to borrow the polite phrase. In a fortified house with a fire that sulks, I vote cloth. In summer, when the walls stop weeping and the air is merciful, linen alone is gospel. I keep a scarf by the bed, a long strip, light wool. On brittle nights, I tie it loosely round my neck and mouth, not mummy style, more like a promise. The breath warms in that little tunnel, and my chest thanks me in the morning. Quirky fact, some physicians recommended a night mask of fine cloth in winter to temper the air. Others derided it as mollycoddling. There's your academic debate phrase, prescriptive medical advice versus vernacular practice. My verdict is purely empirical. My coughs are fewer, my throat less peevish, and I do not wake tasting the inside of a bell. There is a ritual to doffing day wear and donning nightwear that pleases the mind as much as the skin. Your body understands when the belt unhooks, when the tunic loosens, when the last daylight smell shakes out of your sleeves and is replaced by the cleaner, quieter scent of sleep. I fold tomorrow's shirt and hang it at the bed curtain head, a little downwind of my breath, so it learns not to bite in the morning. Old age wisdom with a wink. Be kind to the human you are at dawn. That person is fragile and has access to knives for butter. My boots wait at the same angle every night, turned outward like two patient ducks. That is habit, not tidiness. If I need to move quickly, smoke, cough, cry from the nursery, I can step straight in without inventing new dances on cold stone. A cloak rests on the chest, ready to become an extra layer or an expedition coat. The belt and knife nest beneath the pillow edge. No bravado, just a recognition that houses do not always keep perfect hours. Joke 2. Nothing says romance like whispering, "Darling, where did we leave the flint?" I slide into the bed and take stock of the little climate within the curtains. The cap sits right. The scarf is optional tonight. The socks settle without wrinkles, which is to say I will not dream of strangling snakes. The robe I fold and lay along the windward edge as a draught baffle, a trick taught to me by a woman who could quiet a room with a shawl. Quirky aside, if you ever doubt the intelligence of textiles, watch a shawl change the temperature of a conversation. Academic minds will label it effective affordances of material culture. The rest of us will call it common sense with fringe. Some insist on a belt over the nightshirt to keep everything tidy. I find belts bossy in bed, though I respect those who like their nightgown to understand where it should be at all times. Old age wisdom offers a compromise. A soft tie high at the waist, loose enough to move under, firm enough to keep cloth from staging a coup around your knees at 3 in the morning. I loop one on now and instantly feel the chaos index lower. There are economies here, and they are not miserly. If I rise to tend the fire, I do not abandon my hard-won warmth to the room's appetite. The robe becomes a travelling microclimate, the cap a passport, the mitts little visas for fingers. I do my errand, stir, add a log, check the shutter latch like it owes me money, and return with my heat largely intact. Old age wisdom knows the price of rewarming and avoids paying it twice. Joke 3. Never leave a bed you cannot legally re-enter without paperwork. Night clothes carry stories the way knives carry a sheen. The cuff remembers soup. The hem remembers a floor's meadow. The shoulder remembers the weight of a sleepy child. When they wear thin, they graduate to rags and polishing cloths, and the cycle continues. Quirky fact. Some housekeepers kept a small book where they noted when linens were last boiled, darned, turned. This is not bureaucracy. It is how softness is kept in a hard climate. The academic phrase nods domestic accounting as resilience practice. And for once, I rather like the sound of it. I settle, the wool singing its quiet song, the linen cooler at the nape where the pulse beats, the socks telling my toes that all negotiations are concluded for the night. Somewhere a door stirs. Someone stifles a cough. The dog in his crescent redraws himself by the length of a sigh. The cap warms my temples, and the thoughts that like to race decide the track is closed. Old age wisdom closes the circle with a final simple line. Be snug, not sealed. Be warm, not sweaty. Be ready, not suspicious. Between those markers, sleep finds you quicker than pride. The hearth has slumped into a geometry of reds, squares and wedges and constellations in ember. A quiet map that reads, not dead yet. I slip from the bed with the robe as cloak and the cap holding thought in, and I kneel to do the small liturgy of night tending. Old age wisdom first. Bank your fire like you bank your coin. You will want it in the morning. I rake the coals gently with the poker's curved nose, drawing the liveliest embers inward to kiss, then lay a stout backlog behind them and a modest splitter in front, the old push-pull arrangement that feeds itself slow. Joke 1. Medieval thermostats are just me with a stick pretending to understand dragon behavior. Smoke is a creature of personality and poor boundaries. It wants to meet my eyes, introduce itself to my lungs, and then redecorate the rafters in shades of soot. The flue here draws better than some. Someone understood angles, lift, and the gift of a proper throat. But winter air presses like a landlord, and now and then the draft reverses with an opinionated cough. There's an overtly academic debate phrase about chimney efficacy in transitional architectures, which is to say, between central hearths and proper stacks, people inhaled a curriculum of smoke. My proof is under my nails, in the house's smell, and in the way every tapestry has a shadow that never came from sun. I set 3 candles on the iron bracket. 1 would do for sight, but 3 make a paler circle and a friendlier lie about warmth. Candles heat the room about as effectively as compliments improve weather, but the mind listens to light and decides to unclench. Quirky fact. Beeswax burns cleaner and brighter than tallow, sings with a faint honeyed breath, and does not announce itself as a byproduct of someone's dinner. In a hall of means, beeswax means feast day. In a chamber like this, a single beeswax taper feels like a festival inside of a whisper. Old age wisdom nevertheless advises thrift. Save the good wax for tasks that require good eyes. Or for the night when the midwife is fetched and candles must be more than pretty. The embers shift and sigh. I open the small ash door to give them a taste of air, then close it before the room's hunger drafts the heat away. A log pops as sap finds an exit. Sparks skip like tiny meteors and die short of mischief. Thank the stone hearth and the good sense to keep rushes obediently back. There's a small iron trivet that lives here like a permanent resident. I set the lidded pot on it to keep the stew's memory warm, because there is a special pleasure at midnight in a spoonful that pretends to be a meal. Old age wisdom. Feed the fire, feed yourself, but never turn your back on either. The number of curtains baptized into brief catastrophe by negligence would fill an annal. I take the warming pan from its hook, brass lid pierced with starlets, and scoop a handful of cherry coals into its belly with the shovel. The handle is long for a reason. Inside the pan, a tiny, manageable hell. I slide it between the sheets with brisk, constant movement, painting heat into the linen's chill as if I am ironing the night. The trick, learned with a singed lesson, is not to linger. Joke 2. The device works beautifully until you decide to toast a single location to perfection. Then it becomes a branding iron for the inattentive. There is an academic aside I can resist. Documentary evidence for widespread use of warming pans skews elite and late. Rural houses loved hot stones and bricks more than brass with holes. As ever, region and purse do the voting. Candles gutter when the door mutters. I trim the wicks with the snuffer's edge, and the flames sharpen, developing little blue feet. That tiny act of care stops them from smoking, which spares the ceiling and my head. Quirky aside, tallow wicks left long willflower into a snuff that looks like a tiny black mushroom. If you've never tapped one off onto the hearth and watched it skitter, your childhood lacked specific mischief. Old age wisdom in a different key. Clear the exhaust, in chimneys and in life, or the room fills up with yesterday. The hearth smoke has a calendar memory. In summer, it meanders up and behaves as if the world belongs to it. In winter, it negotiates. This is why hoods and canopies evolve from ambition to necessity. The Great Hall hood is a theatre prop that actually works. The chamber's narrow flue is a compromise that needs confidence and dry fuel. Scholars will tell you about fuel economies, charcoal, peat, timber. I have opinions. Charcoal braziers are lovely for a controlled heat and terrifying in a sleeping room. It is a quiet killer, that gas you cannot see. Peat smells of earth and old lakes and leaves a ghost of itself in everything. Timber is loyal if seasoned. Green wood is a messy lawyer who bills by the cough. I step to the window and listen to the shutter argue with the storm. On a better day, I would crack it to let the smoke learn humility and the air turn over. Tonight, I respect the treaty of curtains and settle for the chimney's lesson alone. The candles write a buttery film on the horn pane, softening the moon's scowl into something like mercy. Joke 3. My weather app is a shutter with opinions and a dog who refuses to go out. The hearth, banked, is not just heat, it is time. You tuck away an ember because morning has needs, because bread wants a friendly start, because flint and steel at dawn test both patience and theology. Old age wisdom. Never let the fire go out if you can help it. Borrow if you must, and return the favor when someone knocks with a cold brand in a hat. Quirky fact. There were legal kerfuffles in some towns over carrying fire across lanes. Safety versus solidarity, a medieval version of the HOA email. The academic phrase would be communal risk management of open flame, which is fair, if unromantic. The reality is simpler. Our species likes its son domesticated and hates begging for a light. I sit a moment and feel the heat press against my shins while my back registers the room. A subjective reality. The contrast teaches prudence. Over warm in front, you sweat. Then the bed steals the sweat's heat like a tax, and you wake colder than if you had been moderate. So I roast just enough to push the blood to my fingertips, then stand and turn, giving my back the same charity. A minute for hands, a minute for spine, a minute for patience. Academic minds will model radiant asymmetry and convective currents. I mark a clock by how long the skin forgets to flinch. Before I crawl back into the small republic of blankets, I herd the candles to safer stations. One at the far post, one on the high shelf, one snuffed outright because sense beats spectacle at 2 in the morning. The room dims to a kind amber, and the hearth mutters, promises rather than threats. Old age wisdom clucks one more reminder. Latch the screen if you have one, rake the errant coal, and keep the broom head dry. Wet brooms spread embers like gossip. I slide into the bed, and the heat I painted into it earlier answers kindly. Not a shout, but a ready hand. The dog lifts its head, decides no emergency exists, and returns to its vocation. Through the curtain crack, the candle's flame is a small, domesticated star. The fire, domesticated sun. Between them, a human-sized night is possible. Scholars will call it risk-comfort calibration in pre-modern interiors. I call it making friends with flame without letting it run the house. The window is a riddle that the room asks every night. How do you let the day in without inviting the weather to live here rent-free? I stand by the embrasure and touch the shutter. It shivers like a skittish horse. The bar is stout oak, the hinges iron with a memory of summer's ease. Now, in deep cold, the wood has swollen as if it drank the fog, and every movement is a negotiation. Old age wisdom. Oil the hinges before winter, and hang a draft strip at the sill, cloth, felt, even a rolled stocking, to stop the sneaky wind that creeps low like a gossip. I adjust the snake of cloth along the bottom, and feel the draft turn from ambition to sulk. Joke 1. My favourite handyman is a towel with trust issues. I ease the shutter open a thumb's width. The outside air arrives with opinions, tasting of iron and night, and the horn pane behind it takes the edge off, turning moonlight buttery and the wind's fury into a muffled hum. Quirky fact: horn windows are exactly what they sound like. Slices of horn scraped thin until they behave like stubborn glass. They ripple the world the way heat does, and they smear candle flame into soft halos. Elsewhere, I have seen oiled cloth pulled taut in frames, a cheaper answer that smells faintly of flaxen kitchen when the sun warms it. The overtly academic debate phrase here is regional prevalence and efficacy of translucent pain substitutes, and it is one of those topics where certainty is a luxury. My nose says horn weeps less in cold, cloth leaks less in wind. My fingers say both beat staring into a slit where the night is a knife. Glass exists, yes, but not like our age treats it. Here it is a guest, not a citizen. Wealth brings it early to urban fronts and chapel windows, more rarely to chambers where bodies sleep. When there is glass, it is thick and greenish, full of bubbles like captured breath, and it dews into a miniature weather report when the room exhales. I run a finger along the sill and feel the tiny beads of condensation wobble and smear. Old age wisdom says crack the shutter for a minute at dusk, and at dawn to trade the stale for the sharp. Shut it firm between, and trust curtains to do the rest. Good habits are shutters for the mind. I lift the curtain by the window, a heavy wool that hangs like a sensible aunt, and let it fall again after checking the latch. Draft management is choreography. You do not block everything. You encourage movement to be gentle, to curve, rather than stab. The window recess itself is a climate. Colder at the sill, less cruel in the upper corners. A place where plants die and books warp unless you court them carefully. I set a small stool there anyway, for mornings when the sun founder flops through the cloud and warms a strip you can claim with a cup. Old age wisdom. Chase the light, even when it behaves like a lazy cat. There is a muntin across the horn pane, a wood lattice that divides the sheet into modest diamonds. The joints are stuffed with a putty that has seen better days and several generations of thumbs. I press it and feel it give, then push it back into line like a baker correcting a pastry. Quirky aside, some households sealed winter seams with a paste of flour and water, or even a smear of goose fat, which tells you what the priorities were. Warmth first, dignity a sporting second. Scholars might label this vernacular ceiling compounds with a straight face, and I cannot top that. Shutters are more than lids, they are shields. On storm nights, they keep not only wind, but worry outside. When they rattle, the room grows shoulders. I wedge a sliver of wood, the universal fix between bar and jam, and the complaining subsides to a mutter. There's a half-remembered rhyme about east winds and aching joints. The body keeps its own weather law and sometimes wins the argument. Academic ink has dried on meteoropathic symptomatology far more recently than you'd think. Our bones have been sending reports forever. Old age wisdom simply says, if the wind's in the east, keep an extra blanket and your best temper. When morning comes hard, the window tells on the night. Frost feathers creep across horn and glass alike. Ferns and fletchings drawn by a patient, invisible artist. Sometimes the pattern is so fine you could swear angels were testing quills. Quirky fact, scrape frost from the inside of a pane with a knife, and it squeals like a mouse with stage fright. Better to breathe a ring of warm air and clear a porthole with your sleeve. The scientific phrase for this is condensation dynamics, but I'm partial to the room's cold autobiography. I remember a townhouse where the winters taught a different lesson. No horn there, true glass in the casements, narrow, leaded, each quarry's edge a line of silver solder. The glazier left his mark, a tiny stamped symbol in the corner, proud as any mason's signature. The difference was not miraculous. Drafts still found their tunnels, but light behaved more generously, and the world beyond was less of a rumour. Old age wisdom. Better light is not warmer, but it makes cold feel less like a verdict and more like a condition you can outtalk. There's always a question of how much to show the night. Windows are eyes, and eyes can attract attention. In insecure times, shutters are clamped and barred, and the room learns to live in lamplight. In easier hours, you risk a slit for air and the pleasure of hearing the snow fuss against wood. Weighing those choices is its own bedtime story. The academic debate phrase, security ventilation trade-offs in fortified domestic spaces, deserves a shorter nickname. I propose, do I breathe or hide? Tonight, I choose breathe a little, hide enough. I slide the bench back from the embrasure. The chill that pools in the stone bay creeps outward with the persistence of an understudy who believes in their moment. I answer with a rug, not to warm the whole floor. That's folly, but to interrupt the river of cold. Quirky aside, in towns, window seats grew cushions and gossip. In castles, they grew cloaks. If you've ever tried to read by a winter window without a cloak, you've done penance for sins you cannot recall. Sometimes I pin an extra cloth across the inside of the shutter, makeshift secondary glazing. It looks like nothing. It feels like sense. The cloth catches condensation before it can turn into the north wall's tears, and in the morning you wring it out like a small, solvable problem. Old age wisdom loves actions that turn misery into chores. You can do a chore. You can cross a chore off a list. Cold is less cooperative, but it respects a good list. Before I leave the window to its muttering, I rest my knuckles on the horn pane. It is cool and faintly greasy from the last oiling, a texture you learn to associate with will not crack in frost. I have heard elaborate sermons about windows as metaphors, eyes of the soul, gates of perception, blah, and so on. But in winter, I am loyal to their honest labour. They mitigate, they mediate, they are imperfect peacekeepers between inside and out. Old age wisdom, written in shorthand on every sill, block what bites, invite what brightens. I bar the shutter, reset the draft snake, and let the curtain down. The room grows a shade deeper and a degree kinder. Somewhere in the corridor, a hinge complains like an aristocrat with a blister. Joke 2. I have yet to meet a medieval building that didn't sound like a travelling orchestra tuning. The bed waits, and between my fingers, the little split in the putty has left a smear, a reminder that most of wintercraft ends up on your hands. Academic friends will map manual engagement with environmental control. I will say, you learn to touch the places where the weather leaks. Back inside the curtain's microclimate, the difference is immediate, like moving from a drafty argument into a private agreement. The dog resettles, thumping its tail against the truckle in the rhythm of contentment. Joke 3. I whisper to the shutter, "Thank you for your service," as if I'm not going to curse it again at dawn. Quirky final note. When spring finally shows a decent face, the first day you open the window wide and let the room breathe feels like a pardon signed by the sun. Until then, we live by half inches and sensible cloth, by horn and habit, by the small, boring miracles that keep the frost polite. By late autumn, I can feel the house begin its quiet migration, a shuffle of furniture and habits that looks like redecorating, but is really cartography. We chase the sun, we dodge the wind, we turn rooms into seasons. Old age wisdom phrases it like a travel tip. Live where the light lives, sleep where the wind dies. The great chamber that felt benevolent in July has grown drafty shoulders. The small solar on the south side starts clearing its throat meaningfully. Joke 1. Medieval interior design secret. Your favorite room is actually the sun's favorite room, and you're just renting it by the month. The move is not a parade. It is a series of errands. Servants lift the bed curtains from their summer posts, heavier ones coming down from presses that smell of cedar and starch. The bed itself might migrate if you have the backs for it. 4 posts reassembled in a smaller chamber, rope lattice retightened, mattress coaxed into a new geography. There's an overtly academic debate phrase about seasonal transhumance of domestic space, which makes us sound like sheep, and perhaps we are. We follow heat like clever animals. In some houses, it's less dramatic. Beds stay put, but we pull screens and settle into a winter corner. A pocket where a stove, a brazier, or just a kinder wall can help. Tapestries also wander. The hunting scene that flattered the wide north wall in summer now serves in the narrow passage where the wind plays at being a knife. I watch as 2 people lift a rolled hanging like a carpet snake, carry it with the solemnity of pallbearers, and fix it to new pegs hammered into oak laths. Behind the places hangings lived for months, the stone weeps an honest map of breath. Old age wisdom, beat and air before rehanging. Smoke loves wool the way gossip loves silence. Quirky fact, some inventories list summer say and winter arras as separate sets. Lighter linens for heat, heavy cloths for cold, a wardrobe for walls. Chairs creep closer to the hearth as if they remember stories only told at this distance. The trestle table pivots to catch the morning strip of sun that the small south window manages on clear days. The settle, high-backed bench that is really a mobile windbreak, rolls into its winter berth, turning drafts into rumours for whoever sits tucked in its lee. Academic ink gets happily spent on whether such seasonal furniture choreography was universal or elite. My experience says, where there is choice, people choose. Where there is none, people adapt with the same stubborn wit, building microclimates out of patience instead of planks. Bed businesses multiply in winter. A truckle that lived politely beneath the big bed in summer earns its keep by night, drawn out near the hearth when the cold bullies the youngest or the oldest. We move the cradle where the embers can be watched without despair, but far enough that sparks cannot practice evil. The big bed in the old summer chamber becomes a daybed for sowing sunlight hours. The winter bed in the smaller room becomes a republic at night. Curtains close, laws pass, sleep happens. Old age wisdom. Give your old bones and your new ones the warmest corners. Resentment freezes faster than water. I do rounds with the key basket, unlocking presses and chests that hold winter kit. Out come the thickest blankets, folded like obedient clouds. Out come the furs, some pieced, some whole, each smelling faintly of smoke and time. I run my palm along their nap, and the room grows a spine. Quirky aside, moths hold elections in summer and try to form governments in your textiles. Cedar, smoke, and good housekeeping are the opposition party. Someone mentions sachets of rosemary tucked into linen stacks. The scent writes an instant lullaby over the dust of the year. Windows get their winter faces. We pin extra cloth over the frame's inside joints, a domestic double glazing that looks like humility and feels like smugness. A draft snake migrates from the seldom used north door to the often used but terribly behaved west door. Shutters earn their grease, latches learn their winter creak. In the great hall, we hang greens high. Holly and ivy come their season, not for heat, but for spirit. Academic debate rolls softly through like fog. How widespread was this seasonal reconfiguration? My field notes are a long list of as much as budget and bodies allow. The desire is universal. The execution is local. We shift our hours with the light, which is another migration, gentler but no less real. Winter wakes later. Winter eats earlier. Winter's talk is longer by the hearth and shorter in the yard. Old age wisdom. Squander no daylight in December and no darkness in June. Joke 2. The calendar is a bossy roommate who insists on rearranging the furniture and the entire concept of mourning. I set a small stool in the south embrasure, knowing that on rare, generous days the sun will fit exactly there for an hour and make a reader of me whether I planned it or not. In kitchens and still rooms, the move is audible. The small back door barred more often, the big hearth given the stage, the curing hooks loaded, the brewing bench pushed away from the draught. The house's breath gets shorter and richer. Fat, spice, smoke. Cloths hang near warmth to dry. Racks appear that have no summer purpose. Quirky fact, some families kept warming cloaks on pegs by the back door. Shabby, serviceable wraps to throw over shoulders for quick ventures to yard or shed. A buffer between human heat and January's appetite. Academic phrasing might call these transitional garments facilitating micro-journeys. I call them the difference between a chore and a complaint. The move is not only strategic, it is ceremonial. We say goodbye to summer rooms with an afternoon we pretend is ordinary. One last table laid where the late sun pets it. One last nap where the breeze still tells jokes. Then we close shutters, draw curtains, and let those rooms sleep. We greet the winter rooms with a first fire that is slightly too ambitious, with a pot that simmers like it applied for the job, with cushions beaten into plump, immodest readiness. Old age wisdom loves a threshold. It reminds us to step over it with intention. I carry a small brazier of coals from the big hearth to the winter room. It's cold grate like a pilgrim with breakfast. This is the house's arterial system, this moving of ember to ember, a red thread that stitches spaces into a season. There are rules whispered in hallways. Never cross the rushes with fire without a lid. Never set down a pan on a sill. Never assume the cat understands physics. Joke 3. The cat understands physics. The cat rejects your authority. Shelves change their minds. Summer's cups and pitchers retreat. Winter's heavier mugs and lidded pots advance. Bedside tables acquire candles and spoons. A jar of salve for cracked hands. A twist of dried mint to bully coughs. The settle pockets a small hoard. Flint. A bone needle tucked wickedly into a beam crack. A folded list of something we keep forgetting to fetch from the loft. Quirky aside, every winter someone invents a new place to keep the warming pan and loses it for 3 days. Every winter the pan is discovered in the last place smug and slightly sooty, as if to say you needed the exercise. We talk logistics as if we are planning a voyage. Who sleeps where if the wind persists from the east? Which door gets the thick curtain? When to bring the hens inside if the cold turns predatory? Academic minds would graph household adaptive strategies by severity index. We sketch it verbally, with finger roots on tabletops, and vows to remember which window's putty has turned to butter. Old age wisdom underlines the plan with its patient pencil. The house is a ship. Winter is a sea. Sailors keep watch. By the time the first hard frost writes its delicate threat on the inside of a pane, the winter quarters are alive. The summer ones wait, dignified, for their next season. We will visit them like old friends when the sun returns, surprised again by their size and their good humor. For now, the smaller rooms hold our breath kindly. The moved hangings eat the draft's words, and the bed in its new harbor rocks only when we tell it to. Migration complete, we sleep better, not because the cold is gone, but because our feet know where to go in the dark, and our hands can find the matches without thinking. Old age wisdom, smiling in the doorway, make your world smaller, and you make it warmer. Night sounds are a census you take with your ears. Before sleep closes the ledger, the house reads itself aloud. Beam settling, ash sighing, a bucket's iron hoop ticking as it cools. The corridor's faint throat clearing, that is only the wind practicing manners. Old age wisdom. Name the harmless noises so the dangerous ones stand out. Joke 1. The difference between a house's personality and a haunting is whether you can fix it with a wedge, a nail, or a polite word to the cooper. The timbers talk in winter. Oak has a better memory than people grant it. It keeps the day's sun in its length and releases it at night with small reports, as if remembering a joke too late. The pegged joints murmur. A truss, asked to carry snow, changes its vowels. I have lain awake and learned a grammar of creak that tells me when the roof is only thinking hard and when it is proposing effort. There's an overtly academic debate phrase about acoustic diagnostics of pre-modern structures. That is a mouthful for what carpenters do with their eyes shut and a finger on the beam. Wind has instruments. Through keyholes, it plays the fife. Under the door, it drags a dull bow. In the chimney, it tries a bassoon and mostly gets honks, with the occasional note so pure it feels like a warning from a saint. Quirky fact, a loose tile can become a percussionist, a downpipe a melancholy flute. In the yard, the well rope knocks the curb like a polite debtor. Old age wisdom. Tie what can knock, wedge what can slap, and teach the rest to be lullabies by listening until your fear loses its job. Then there's water, the least shy tenant. A Thor at midnight conducts a small orchestra. Drip from eave, drip from spout, drip from the knee of the gargoyle that always chooses that moment to be precise. In hard freezes, pipes are rarer beasts, but where there are lead conduits or wooden water mains, they complain in dull, throat-clearing booms as ice proposes occupation. Academic minds call this freeze-thaw hydraulic stress. We call it get the kettle and the towels. Joke 2. If you can't fix it with heat, patience, or swearing softly, you probably need a smith. Animals annotate the night. The dog edits with quiet growls and clackless yawns, tail thumping approval at harmless shadows. Mice run their little postal service in the wainscot, light and fast, inventing roads you cannot block with law. A cat on patrol becomes a punctuation mark, comma when it settles, exclamation when it springs. In the yard, if the moon is honest, an owl writes O on the air with its voice. Old age wisdom. Learn which noises belong to hunger and which to curiosity. Feed the first with traps and tidy stores, the second with a window slit and a little patience. Sounds are the book's warmest pages. A sleeper's breath has seasons, longer, shorter. A winter of snore that blooms, then subsides. A child coughs once, then again. The second cough lifts me before the third arrives. In the next chamber, a restless elder rehearses old injuries with the mattress ropes. Do not underestimate how much reassurance lives in ordinary noise. Silence has more than one meaning. At certain hours, it means you should rise. Academic types might label this nocturnal caregiving via auditory surveillance. At home, we call it being kin. I keep a small vocabulary for the dangerous exceptions. Cloth whispering where no cloth should move. Fire. Footsteps with intent at an hour that does not have permissions. Guest of the wrong kind. Water that is not dripping but pouring. Pipe or roof doing vocabulary we did not teach. Old age wisdom. Do not argue with your own alarm. You can be embarrassed in the morning. You cannot unburn a curtain. Quirky aside, I once woke the house for a sound that proved to be a hedgehog investigating a dropped apple in the passage. We fed it and the crisis forgave us. There is a sound I dread and respect. The high, thin whine of wind finding a fresh path. It means a slate lifted, a shutter's latch failing, a new letterbox cut by weather into what used to be a wall. This is when the night toolkit earns its keep. Wedge, nail, strip of cloth, the good lantern, a second person if pride will let you ask. Joke 3. Heroism is just maintenance with better lighting. Academic phrase, emergent fault response in vernacular buildings. Translation, something's flapping. Go shut it before the room learns to snow. The best nights are not quiet. They are well tuned. Hearth mutter at mezzo piano. Curtains with a soft breath. Bed ropes that don't sing unless asked. A distant watch bell from the town on the hour, arguing slightly with the church's opinion of what time it is. That argument, steady and small, is civilization purring. Old age wisdom. If the clocks disagree gently, the world is not on fire. And then there are storm nights, when the house joins the choir. Rafters answer like basses. Shutters clap like enthusiastic altos. The chimney hums a drone, and rushes whisper like 1,000 gossipers. In such weather, you do not wait to be brave in the morning. You are practical now. I have rolled from bed into boots while reciting the mental list. Latch, wedge, pan, ember screen, check the loft door, count the candles. The dog becomes an assistant with grievances, but good instincts. Academic analysis would sketch household storm protocols. We call it getting up when the house asks. Morning edits the night's music into marginal notes. A fresh dusting of flour at the sill where the draft snake failed. A wet ring under the window where the cloth caught what would otherwise be frost's preface. A fallen fragment of soot on the hearthstone, announcing a downdraft's brief coup. The ledger of noises becomes a ledger of chores. Old age wisdom smiles its thin smile. If you listened, you already know what to mend. Not all sounds are from the house. Some are from the body. Knees that click like castanets. A spine that performs an aria when you sit up too fast. The sudden trumpet of a sneeze in cold rooms that sends the cat into exile. Quirky fact, some physicians swore by ear baths, warming the ears with a little wool cap or heated cloth before bed to pacify headaches and nightmares. Whether or not the remedy holds, I know this. A warm ear hears kindly. The world sounds less like an indictment and more like a report. When sleep finally takes me, it is because the music has found a key I can inhabit. The fire's syllables shorten, the wind recedes to a corridor. Gossip. The dog chooses the rhythm, and the bed ropes, bless them, forget to comment. I leave a candle stub ready with a trimmed wick for the version of me who wakes at 3 and wants mercy more than philosophy. Old age wisdom closes the book for the hour with this. Some nights you curate, some nights you surrender. Do both with your ears open. By dawn, the house rewrites itself in bird. A single note at first, tentative as a question from the back row, then bolder, as if the Sparrow Union resolved their contract at last. The watch bell sounds smug. The church agrees, for once. The timbers stop speaking philosophy and go back to work. Listening has bought us another night. Mending will buy the next. That is the economy of winter. To learn the difference between danger and theatre, and to let sleep through the door that sounds like home. Morning has an arithmetic that begins at the toes. The first sum is whether the socks kept their oath. The second, whether the fire kept its ember. The third, whether the room kept its truce. Old age wisdom. Count small victories first, or the day will grade you before you won't be sharpened your pencil. I slide a hand from under the covers and test the air. It has teeth but not a bite. Joke 1. Today's forecast, brisk with a chance of self-congratulation. I sit up, and the bed ropes answer with a single creak, the good kind. A greeting rather than a complaint. The cap, which migrated in the night to an angle of rakish disrepute, is coaxed back to civilized. Socks still loyal. The warming pan, retired to its hook, glints once through the curtain crack like a medal no one asked to polish. I open the bed curtains, a hand's width. A square of grey proves the shutter is behaving. The room smells faintly of yesterday's stew, beeswax, and a mineral cold that has lived in stone longer than syntax. Old age wisdom. Breathe it in. Call it bracing. Proceed. The ember test is next. I ease from bed into boots, the robe closing around me like a conspirator, and kneel to the hearth. Beneath their ash duvet, the coals keep their small red eyes. Praise be. I scratch them together with the poker S nose until they kiss into a more decisive glow and feed them a thin kindling ladder, twig by twig, so flame can learn to climb with dignity. Quirky fact: if you place your palm at the hearth's mouth and feel the pull, you're not blessing the fire, you're checking the chimney's ambition. Today, ambition is moderate. The smoke obeys like a child you promised a story. Water sits in the lidded pot like a witness. I set it closer, and it complains with tiny ticks as the metal remembers the idea of warm. A heel of bread meets the edge of the trivet. One side will be stern with toast, the other still domestic with yesterday. The dog yawns, spine to paws, a ballet of loyalty wrapped in fur, then pads to the door and looks over its shoulder with the solemnity of a magistrate. Old age wisdom: attend to the creatures, their clocks are truer than yours. I crack the door a finger to let the animal go about its morning jurisprudence, and crack the window a second finger to square the account with air. Morning light arrives late and without theatre, a pewter sheen that slides down the wall and finds the rushes honest. I trim last night's candle into a sensible cone and strike flint to steel. The first spark misses, the second sulks, the third catches. In the old books this is called perseverance. In the kitchen it is called breakfast. Academic friends would write ritualized ignition procedures. I mutter a word my grandmother would have recognized and lower the taper S small victory into a second wick. Clothes next. The day's version. The linen shirt has learned good manners from its night on the peg, and does not bite as I tug it on. I shake the wool gown to fluff its stubborn memory, then thread my arms and feel my mood improve by degrees. Belt, knife, key basket. The cold kisses my cheeks and then seems content it has been acknowledged. Joke 2. Winter is a cat. Ignore it and it sits on your work. Greet it and it sits on your lap. Breakfast is a civic act. I pour hot water over oats in a small pot and stir with a wooden spoon that has seen more mornings than some kings. A pinch of salt, a notion of honey, a whisper of yesterday's apple. The smell rises calm and honest, which is everything I want from a life before noon. Quirky aside, some households name their spoons. Baker, porridge, gravy. Not superstition, but logistics. The porridge spoon's bowl is worn on the right. Habits carve wood the way rivers carve valleys. The room wakes with me. From the corridor, feet begin their day, soft, then brisk, then command. Then, a pail's handle rings the cadence of duty. Somewhere, the still room door complains in its upper hinge, which means it is time to take the oil can visiting. Old age wisdom. Mend on the way to things. Errands breed in corners. I swallow the last spoonful, set a lid on the pot for the late riser, and tie my hair back with the strip of linen that also serves as measuring tape, tourniquet, and treaty flag in the nursery. There's a list on the settle's arm, written last night with a pencil stub and a hopeful heart. It says, sweep flue, turn mattress, fetch wood, change rushes, oil hinges, check the loft for drips, darn the socks that mutinied. Academic minds might call this maintenance scheduling for environmental resilience. I call it not letting winter accrue interest. The broom, straw, and hazel bound in twine leans like a colleague. I nod to it and mean it. Turning a mattress is a choreography you learn with laughter or with bruises. Four hands, two at least. Ropes retightened afterwards so the bed does not go slack in its duties. We lift, pivot, flop, then fold sheets back, with the crisp pleasure of making a surface that behaves. Quirky fact: some houses mark the mattress edge with chalk. N-S-E-W. So the turning follows a rotation that keeps lumps democratic. Old age wisdom. Fairness is a virtue, even in straw. Woodfetching is a pilgrimage you will make too often to treat as poetry, and too seldom to treat as nothing. The yard's cold is a different society entirely. Political, brisk, inhospitable, without malice. I step into it with the warming cloak because dignity is not a temperature. The woodpile holds layers of decisions. The seasoned logs stacked with grain like a book, S-edge. The kindling bundle tied with an old garter. The emergency bundle under the lean-to that you swear you will never touch and sometimes must. I carry in what I can without making a martyr of myself. Joke 3. Whoever invented armfuls also invented dropping one piece 3 times at the threshold. Back inside, the room receives the wood as if it were gossip. The hearth approves. I knock ash into the pan, bank the fire for the day's temperament, and hang the kettle from the iron crane with the confidence of a contract renewed. The broom and I confer about the rushes. They have done a brave 5 weeks and now smell like a summary of other people's winters. We roll them up, cousins to the tapestry snakes, and shake their history out in the yard. New rushes go down, green when cut, now tawny and obliging. Their scent a small river remembered. Quirky aside, a handful of dried mint mixed in makes even complaints sound fresher. Before the light grows bossy with tasks, I take a minute to write the weather in the little book that is not a diary because it refuses confession and loves data. Wind NE. Hard. Frost inside on east panes. Smoke steady. Dog reluctant. My hands less so. Academic term. Phenological household record. Old age wisdom. Call it what the day felt like. So your future self can decide when to plant peas and when to send for more wood before everyone else remembers. The house, now fully on its morning feet, gives me my last small luxury. The South Embrasure's sun coin appears, narrow and golden like a favour. I sit in it with my mending. The sock that failed has a hole at the heel the size of a parliament. I set the darning egg and make my small warp and weft, bridge by bridge, a little cloth over absence. This is winter's thesis written in thread, not perfection, continuity. Old age wisdom nods without smirking. By the time the bell in town scolds 9, the bed is neat, the embers bridled, the brooms smug, the hinges newly moderate, and the day ready to sprout its unplanned difficulties. The dog returns from jurisprudence, with snow on its nose, and a face that argues for a fireside nap. I concede. We live by these concessions and these stubbornnesses. The house will ask for more. We will answer. The arithmetic, begun at the toes, ends at the door. Hat, cloak, tasks. Step into the cold. Carry out warmth. Bring it back in a different shape. That is the bargain, and today at least, we can pay it. There is a politics to fuel that turns even quiet households into small parliaments. Wood is not wood. It is oak, with a memory for heat, ash with manners, birch with a flirtatious bark that catches quick and burns out like gossip. Old age wisdom. Burn slow what took long to grow. Burn quick what volunteered. Joke 1. If you want a metaphor for human character, watch a mixed fire argue itself into balance. Stacks are biographies written in grain. You can read a winter back through them. What storms asked of you. What errands you managed before the lane went to glass. What favours you owed the neighbour with the dry shed and the better cart. There's an overtly academic debate phrase about fuel hierarchies and procurement networks, which is accurate and undercooked. The truth is nearer to boots and backs. Who had time before the rain? Whose axe bites true? Which coppice is yours by law and which is yours by kindness? I run a hand over a split oak face and feel summer caught there, patient as a held breath. Green wood is greed in disguise. It promises presence, look, abundance, and delivers smoke, sulk, and hiss. Seasoned wood is a friend who doesn't need you to clap. Ash will burn even if you are careless, which is why it grows in Proverbs. Elm is a puzzle box. It splits when it remembers you deserve it. Quirky fact. Apple wood smells like an orchard ghosting your kitchen and spits only enough to keep you humble. Old age wisdom. Stack by the wall with bark down, ends to air. Keep the ground from drinking your heat with a few honest pallets or stones. Then there are fuels that are not wood and have their own temper. Peat asks for patience at the cutting, summer's dry shelf to make it forget its bog. And then, in the hearth, it gives a steady, earthy heat and a smell like old books telling jokes. Charcoal is refined mischief, a clean, deep burn that gives little smoke and too much confidence. It is perfect for a brazier you will watch and wrong for a room you will leave. Academic phrase. Carbon monoxide risk in enclosed heating practices. Household translation. Do not nap beside a charcoal fire unless you mean to leave the story early. In town, fuel is coin. In the country, Fuel is ours. Which is more expensive depends on your purse and your bag. I have bartered for cartloads of brush when oak was for richer throats. I have traded a day's labour mending a fence for a cord cut short of dignified measure, but long enough to be forgiven. Quirky aside, there are 100 petty units, faggots, billets, bavin, trugs, and 1,000 ways to be cheated by a stack that smiles wide at the front and sulks shallow at the side. Old age wisdom: measure twice, pay once, and make friends with the person who owns the scale. Kindling is its own economy. Save shavings from the shaving horse, the plains curled scripture, the cooper's hoops offcuts, the broken spoon handle that failed at dinner but excels at birth, a split reed, a feather of birch bark, a twist of rush dipped in tallow and saved as a firewick, all little ambassadors of flame. Joke 2. Nothing burns as fast as the list of things you meant to keep dry, which is why we keep a small, bossy basket with a lid, and we feed it like a cautious pet. There's a layout to a good hearth that would satisfy a general. Backlog to hold heat, forestick to feed heat, room in the middle to conduct the introductions. Too tight, and the fire sulks from lack of air. Too loose, and it pouts from lack of company. The rake, the poker, the tongs, the little whisk, all with their hooks and their duties. Academic friends would draft hearth tool typologies and ergonomic placement. I call it, put the business where sleepy hands can find it without starting a second kind of fire. We keep a ledger for fuel as we do for flour, not miserly but mindful. How many baskets to the week if the wind sleeps? How many if it stamps? When to tap the emergency pile with the flinty piece you grant a reserve? When to borrow an armful from the dairy because the dairy floor holds night like a grudge? Old age wisdom. Never be proud when you should be prudent. Never be prudent when you should be kind. If a neighbour knocks with cheeks like cherries and a hat full of snow, you hand them warmth you cannot spare and learn to go without with better stories. Ash, the aftermath, has as many uses as fire has moods. Fine ash, sifted, makes lye water, and lye water makes shirts honest. Coarser ash, cooled and sure of its virtue, sweetens a midden's acid temper and persuades icy paths to remember humility. Quirky fact: a ring of ash around a bedpost foot discourages the tiny night Democrats that vote with their mouths. The dog sneezes at it as if to prove solidarity. Old age wisdom: return what you can to work. Even yesterday's heat can wash dishes. We argue sometimes about the fuel that isn't a tea fuel but behaves as if it were. Bodies, blankets, conversation. Talk is cheap, says a scowl I know, but I have watched a room warm by degrees as jokes stacked like kindling and stories burned like slow oak, red and steady. Academic minds could file this under social thermoregulation. We call it sitting closer, laughing softer, pouring one more mug of something that steams and agrees with your bones. Not all choices are ours. Forest law has moods. Storms redraw maps. A wet summer writes a ledger of sulking wood and smoky kitchens. This is where the house's winter school teaches improvisation. Brick warmed in the ashes and ferried under a shawl. Stones set by the hearth and slipped into a child's pallet wrapped in cloth. A kettle boiled and refilled, purely for the pleasure of breathing steam. Joke 3. We have invented central heating. It is called 5 friends and a stew. Fuel thieves exist and are rarely wicked. More often they are unlucky. A hedger's boy with fingers like question marks. A widow with a basket that asks. If the stack is low and the winter long, I notice, and then I look away on purpose once so I can sleep again later. Old age wisdom. Weigh mercy against arithmetic with the scales you can bear. The dog will bark, you will hush it. The ledger will smudge, you will mend it in March. At day's end, when the ledger and the stack have both gone down by honest measures, I bank the coals with the topmost ash and set 2 sticks in a modest marriage for the morning. The room glows the colour of a good secret. The dog chooses its crescent. The pot's last warmth leans into the stone and sighs. I blow out the candle with a care taught by singed forelocks and leave the horn pane to capture 1 star for the night. Morale. The academic phrase for this close is resource governance at the domestic scale. Mine is simpler. We kept the fire kept us. Tomorrow we will negotiate again, preferencing sense over pride, warmth over posture, kindness over counting. That is the policy, and the House votes aye.